Hello and welcome once again to episode 74 of Code Completion. We are a group of iOS developers and educators hoping to share what we love most about development, Apple technology, and completing your code. My name is Dimitri and I'll be your host once again for this episode, and I'm joined today by my fellow completionist, Spencer.
Hey there.
And Fernando.
Hello.
It's been roughly a week and a half since we last recorded, since we crunched to get our reaction episode out. And in the meantime, we've had not only the reviews, but also the actual devices, the Mac Studio, Apple Studio Display. Is it called Apple Studio? I don't know what it's called. The M1 Ultra. So lots of stuff that has kind of come out since then. And Fernando is no longer in a different country. He is in the same country for mystical reasons. So hence the difference. So what are your thoughts on all the new stuff?
Yeah, so I've been following a few reviews. As you both know, I'm a fan of tiny, minuscule monitors. So going from a 24-inch to a 27-inch may be a huge dramatic change. But like actually being serious, I'm very happy with my 4Ks. I run two 24-inch 4K monitors, but I've been eventually convinced by both of you and the reviews that a 5K is way more pixels. So I've been coming along to the dark side of huge monitors and trying to find alternatives to the studio display. Very difficult. It's actually a really competitively priced display. So consider me convinced, at least from the display.
Awesome. Yeah, I had the chance to go out to an Apple store, not because I wanted to buy stuff at all. I just wanted to look. Small tier. But it really is funny how small the studio display looked to me compared to, say, the Pro Display XDR, which was right next to it. It really set a size class.
That makes sense.
And yeah, for recording, I always use an iMac, and that is the same 27-inch display. And the iMac is bigger than the studio display because it has those giant bezels around it. So it looks small to my eyes, which are not, I guess, used to it, despite me looking at two portrait ones on a daily basis. So I think you'll be probably fine after an adjustment period of 2 hours, and then your 4K one will look tiny by comparison, and you'll be like, oh, where do I put all these windows? But I think we brought up completely separately on Slack, that's not so much the display size that matters, it's the resolution and how much space that makes available. And I think what really gets me with 4K is if you run 4K at 2x, that's just like a 1080p monitor, and there is no room on that to put anything other than make it as full screen as possible. And then once you start hitting 5K and 6K, you really have room to tile your windows in different ways, just because the UI is smaller as a result. So I think that's going to ruin you more than anything. And I welcome the day when we can have just very high resolution displays of all sizes, and then you can go back to having a smaller desk footprint, but still have plenty of space for your UI stuff.
I will miss my 24-inch. I think, but we'll see. Like I told you guys, if I do end up ordering a few of the studio displays, I'll give you my reviews in 2027 when they're back in stock.
Mm-hmm. So you can run how many of them off your M1 Max? I think 3 of them, correct?
Yeah, but I wouldn't. I still like my 12-inch monitor. Is it 12-inch? I have a think. God, I forgot the brand, but it's a standing portable monitor that runs over USB-C, and that is very useful for the terminal and smaller things. So I'd run 2 studio displays and my smaller monitor. I can't change, Dimitri. Not this quickly.
So you don't use the internal display, which is better than all of those displays.
No, because there's no
That
easy way
is so
to,
ironic to me.
there's no easy way to set it up because I have like two monitors in front of me, the the other on the bottom right, and then it just feels weird with the whole keyboard there. It's wrong.
Mm-hmm. Just rip it off. No, I'm just kidding.
And then I'd have a portable Mac and my keyboard. I mean, I would do it in a pinch. I don't know why you guys keep laughing at me. These are genius ideas.
Well, when you said 12-inch monitor, I just kind of like died a little bit inside. That's all.
I'm pretty sure it's smaller than my iPad Pro, the 13-inch. The monitor.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you should try like running your main like laptop monitor at the same time so that you have like 4 displays. Mostly so you can be ruined by HDR because it's going to make all your other displays look like yuck. Even the studio displays. So this is my grand plan to convert you over to an HDR experience. Spencer, your ultra wide, does it support HDR?
It does, yeah.
Yeah, it's once you see it, it's like that ruins you more than like fast display refresh. I personally think.
Yeah, it's interesting because you've got to make sure that the display itself can be bright enough because there are like a bunch of different like HDR standards, but if it doesn't get, the max brightness doesn't get very high, then it just kind of all looks muted out. So you definitely got to have like a good, like for example, I bought a 4K TV secondhand a couple of years ago for really cheap, and it supported HDR, but it's like 4 years old, and it just doesn't get very bright, so it looks terrible. But I just bought a new TV a couple months ago that the brightness gets up to like 1200 nits or something, and it's very, night and day difference to the HDR-ness, just the way that it looks. So just because a monitor says that it's HDR doesn't mean that it's good HDR, if that makes sense. Obviously, the Pro Display XDR can do what, like 1600 nits or something, 2500?
Yeah, there's an EXR image that I can load up onto it that just has like a lamp, and when you control the brightness of the display, the lamp gets brighter, just like an actual lamp would get brighter. And the lamp is like showing on top of various different things in the scene, and the whole scene actually lights up where you can see more of it. It's a very bizarre experience that you're not really used to from just like changing the brightness on your monitor, because you actually see more, because you're like extending the range of the display and what it's actually capable of. And ironically enough, you extend the range by decreasing the brightness. So as you decrease the brightness, your eyes adjust, quote unquote, and you can see more of the scenery that's in the shadows. And then as you increase the brightness, everything gets whited out because the image actually goes further than 1600 nits. So you actually lose detail. It's a very bizarre experience, to be certain. So what are your thoughts on any of the reviews of the Mac Studio? Did that change your mind as far as wanting one, or still glad to be running the M1 Max on your laptops?
I think for me, if I didn't have a work MacBook Pro with an M1 Max, I would just probably buy the M1 Studio for myself, just probably with an M1 Max. I'm not necessarily sure. Especially for my own like personal stuff, I don't think I need the M1 Ultra. I'm not a window fiend like Demetrius or anything, so 64 gigs would definitely suffice for me. I don't know. I love it. It's like adorable. I've always loved Mac Minis, but it's just like a cuter, like thicker, chunkier Mac Mini, and so I just like want one to have and put on a shelf. But that's a $2,000 paperweight, so I might as well make it functional, I suppose.
And it's a very heavy paperweight, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it would be a good paperweight. So yeah, I would definitely get one if I didn't already have like a work MacBook that works fine for work, and then my MacBook Air works fine for everything that I do personally. So it's very much a I want it but I don't need it type of thing. So Yeah, someday. I really want one though. Like I will get a Mac Studio sometime. I don't know if it's like 10 years when they're, a couple $100 or something, but we'll see.
I'm checking the. Do any of you know the pricing? How cheap could I get an M1 Max?
An M1
$2,000.
Max Studio is 2,000.
No. An M1 Max, like whatever. Like I know the MacBook Pros
Confused.
have what? Oh, I mean, I'm getting to my point. Like, if I wanted just an M1 Max, right? Not necessarily
Yes, the
the
chip.
Studio. Aha, yeah, just a chip. How cheap would I be able to get it? Like, yeah, I'm
$2,000.
sorry. A computer, right? Is it $2,000? Is that the base?
Yeah, for
Yeah.
both the MacBook Pro and the Mac Studio.
Yeah, the MacBook Pro, it comes with the M1 Pro, not the M1 Max.
Right, but you
Oh,
can
sorry.
upgrade-
Yeah, you're right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So upgrading.
So if the MacBook Pro costs 2,000 as a base, then yeah.
Yeah, my bad.
Right, that
But the
makes
Mac
sense.
Studio does at $2,000.
So yeah, the point I was getting at is that in order to get an M1 Max, like the cheapest way is to buy a Studio at $2,000, right? And then from
bring
there
your
on,
own monitor kind of thing.
Yeah.
right, you have to bring your own monitor, and then to get the Ultra, it's 4,000, because the only
Yeah.
machine that runs the Ultra is the Studio.
Yes.
That's expensive, right? Is it not? I
Yeah.
kind of balked
Yeah.
to the price when I saw it, like 4,000. It's obviously a pro machine, right? It's not a consumer machine, so it warrants a higher price tag. But I don't know. Maybe I'm not that much of a pro because my Max, like Spencer said, is way more than enough for what I do, which is like see GIF cats and enjoy life.
Yeah, so pricing wise, so just the CPU, because it is a bin GPU, but just the CPU outpaces the previous Mac Pro. So if you were to compare like prices, apples to oranges style, then it is like way cheaper from the point of view of the Mac Pro base price of 5,000 plus 7,000 to get the 28 core CPU. Plus like the RAM upgrade that requires. So like that is already over 10,000. So 4,000 is probably a steal for people who do need that extra performance. That said, the Mac Studio is still different than the Mac Pro in that you can't expand it to get a ton of RAM. You can't like add extra GPUs and stuff like that. So it is a different beast. It's probably closer to the like trash can Mac Pro that does not have any internal expandability, but does have external expandability.
Right. Yeah, I was watching MKBHD's video on it, and he kind of talked about a couple of those things, but it was interesting to see CPU performance-wise, it was beating out his 28-core Xeon, like Dimitri said. And I believe it was almost always rendering out videos, specifically things that would use the what are they called? The
transcoders and the encoders.
Yeah,
and
the hardware
decoders.
transcoders. To encode and decode. Specifically, it was about as fast, or I think there was one case where the Mac Pro, the Intel Mac Pro, did beat it, but it was in like Premiere and it wasn't using ProRes specifically. So either way, it's almost on par, either using first party or third party software with that Mac Pro. So if you're looking to go from that to a Mac Studio, then yeah, that makes sense. I think for us, where none of us are using anything like I don't know, Scene Kit or anything. We're not game developers where we're dealing with intense 3D models or anything. The only thing that takes up video memory here is a stupid amount of windows for Dimitri. So other than Dimitri's kind of unique use case, I don't know. I think it would probably be more than enough for most people to use the M1 Max, but the M1 Ultra is cool I guess what I'm trying to get at is it's cool that it's basically reached parity with the top of the line, like $50,000 Mac Pro RAM aside and expandability.
Yeah, it is definitely a beast on its own, and Safari, being a 3D compositor of sorts, can like really eat up into graphics performance, but also just like system RAM. So that alongside with running multiple Xcode projects and simulators, like all of those eat into those resources. So for developers, if you're just like working on one project at a time, like probably don't need it. If you are working on several projects at a time or run VMs, like having those extra cores to dedicate to individual machines, then that does give you quite a benefit. So it's something to consider if professionally it would benefit you. From a hobbyist point of view, like as Fernando said, $4,000 is expensive to spend on purely a hobby. So if that's like your primary use case, then if you have the cash to spare, sure. And especially if you're going to be like messing around with 3D stuff, like Blender, then yeah, definitely. But try to outpace the current floor first, and then once you outpace that, then consider getting something better. And that's basically the general strategy I go with. Like the only reason I'm considering one over my current M1 Max is because my current M1 Max, after a week or two of use, not even, after a day or two of use, like it just comes to a grinding halt with some tasks, and it's just like pathetic. So yeah, like I don't want to be like held back by my computer, especially when so much of my time is better used being creative in an intellectual point of view. Like I need to just keep that motivation going as long as I can if I want to get a lot of work done. And every time Safari just suddenly decides I'm going to take 5 seconds to open a window, that just kills that. If I have to now take an hour to go clean everything up, that just kills it entirely. Mm-hmm. So like from those point of views, yes, like I may have more windows open than most, but I have a lot of windows open because like my brain is itself scattered amongst many things, and I don't want to close it because once I close it, then it's out of there. My brain does not have the capacity to remember very many things unless it's shown in front of me. So that's how I cope with that. And yeah, I need more resources to just be able to keep up with that way of working. And I look forward to, in many, many weeks, getting my my order of a M1 Ultra Mac Studio. I tried going to the Apple Store, as I said. They did not have any of the studios in stock. They did have the base model studio. No stores in the area had the Ultra in stock. So I guess I'll try every few weeks to see if maybe they start getting those extreme like configurations like they did for the MacBook Pros when those were resource constrained. And maybe I'll get one a bit earlier, but I don't have high hopes, to say the least. I guess a final thing I wanted to bring up was Max Tech did a teardown of the M1 Ultra, and everything is like really packed tight inside of there. So if you are interested in how they are using the available space, like yes, more than half of it is like a giant fan, but the actual chip of like the system on chip is massive. It is like this big, a few inches square. And although yes, it contains all the RAM and stuff, like they did like make a nice like this is the chip kind of area rather than like this is the half chip and then the RAM is like next to it that they did for the M1. So it really looks like kind of hefty as far as like what is going on in there. So I can only imagine how much crazier that's going to be when the extreme variants of these chips come out for the Mac Pros. But yeah, exciting times to be a nerd, I guess.
Yeah. One thing with the teardown is I can't remember where I saw this. I watched a bunch of Mac Studio stuff last day or two, whenever it came out. There's also like an SSD slot for more expandability in the device itself. So it's not actually soldered onto the SoC as well, or at least maybe there is storage, but it's also expandable. So I thought that was really interesting and kind of
modular.
From...
It's, dare I say, yeah, you beat me to it.
That's their one modular piece. Oh
yeah.
Man.
There's
but they disabled
pins.
it in software.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I'm guessing that's primarily there when you get the 8 terabyte or 4 terabyte options, just to split the chips between two controllers, kind of thing. But yeah, it's nice that is not soldered on. It's nice that there's an actual pin layout that OWC can eventually copy and Apple can eventually enable, like they did for the Mac Pro. Like originally the Mac Pro was not expandable either from the SSD point of view, but they did flip it on in a future firmware update. So I can only imagine that they'll do the same for the Mac Studio eventually. Not that it is like very easy for the user to get into, but they end up winning some extra brownie points for flipping it on after the fact, so they probably end up doing that for strategic reasons more than anything. Like mostly they didn't have time to do it yet.
Yeah, that's probably fair.
Okay, so last week, not only did we get all these fantastic reviews of the Mac Studio and stuff, but we also got Xcode 13.3, and with that comes Swift 5.6. So what better time to check out what's new? Do any of you have like a new favorite feature that we should start off with?
Actually, the first two that we have on our list are the Unavailability Conditions and type Placeholders, which I think are both really cool. I remember when I was working on like the M1 version of our app, there were some features that we would either have to disable for example, there was one that I was working on with keyboard commands that only existed in iOS 15 and I can't even remember which version of macOS, to ignore or not ignore the system commands that were kind of I don't know. Anyway, but you'd have to do like if available iOS 15 or whatever. But the unavailability just kind of flips that, so you could say if iOS 15 isn't available, then it covers anything below that, which I thought is really nice. And at the time, I wish that existed. So that's super cool. Just kind of a nice thing if you have to do any of that logic to conditionally kind of just not even compile that code or whatever. So.
Yeah, it prevents the case where you have that if statement that's just empty. Mm-hmm. When you want to have like
exactly.
a workaround where you have the else that has all the work. So this is nice. One thing to point out is you don't have that asterisk for the unavailability, which is like the cache all for all platforms. That is because you can't do that in the reverse logic. So if you still need to catch all for all platforms, use the traditional availability check. Also to note is it's not available in Objective-C, which is slightly ironic since the original availability came to Swift and Objective-C at the same time. So yeah, this is a Swift-only change. Goodbye, Objective-C. You
slowly but surely
will be missed.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Type placeholders too were, when I was reading about them, I was like, I don't really get this, because what it allows you to do is just put an underscore where there would be a type, and it will perform type inference. And Paul Hudson on Hacking with Swift has a good example where it's like, he has 3 lines of code where it's like just an integer. It's like, let int colon int equals 6, let int equals 6, and then let int colon underscore equals 6. And you're like, why is this a thing? We already have type inference. But then he goes into more complex types, like for example a dictionary where maybe you've got like you only want it to infer part of the type. So maybe the keys, you could say, you say let my dictionary colon in brackets underscore the key, but then the value you explicitly kind of define yourself, or sorry, the value of the dictionary you define yourself, so that it doesn't have to infer the type. Or I think there was one where it was even going into like, so that it didn't have to infer like a generic type in a function, which I thought was like, oh, okay, this is really cool. As soon as you start making generics easier to deal with, that's like a super big thing for me. So it was a very quick shift from like, this seems really weird to, oh, okay, this would be really awesome. So you don't have to write out this super long generic type potentially.
Yeah, I started using them for the generics, like even in the beta period, because I think I shared with both of you, I had some very generic heavy code, and I was unhappy with how things were like not simplifying down to nicer looking code. So I had underscores all over the place for that stuff, and I've since simplified it quite a bit. But yeah, for generics, this is primarily what this is used for, because oftentimes part of the generic, like it needs handholding, but the other parts it's fine with. But you need to just like spell out the whole thing. So if you have 5 generics, that gets crazy quickly. So yeah, very very happy this has come in. Again, like you said, Spencer, it looks kind of useless for the case with like an int, but you'd never use it for that case. So
right.
That's where the value comes in. What about you, Fernando? What features are you looking forward to?
Before we get to the features, I just want to add to that last point, which is that I think it's very complicated to understand some features, and we've talked about this several times, I believe, when it comes to like toy projects or toy examples, right? Like Spencer was saying, like, oh, okay, I get like I sort of like get the concept of placeholder types, or rather type placeholders, but why, right? I see the example, I see that it compiles and understand it, but why would I ever do that? And it isn't until you get into the weeds of things that it starts becoming truly useful. Like Dimitri's code. So it's an interesting and a difficult proposition for the Swift team. Like I'd really like if they could offer, maybe it's outside of the purview, but offer like a little bit of a more complicated example for each pull request, for each new feature. It's open source, so people can come and tell me, hey, well, do it yourself, and I think that's totally fair. I think it's complicated because the more we advance the language, the more complicated it's naturally going to become, right? Even when we try and refactor and try to simplify things, like with type placeholders, it's still going to be more complicated. Like I can already imagine someone new coming in and having a bunch of like underscores where the type would be, and they'd be like, why is this happening? And it may not be super complicated, but it's yet another thing that you have to learn to master the language.
Yeah, okay. It very much is like a minor landmine where if you need to modify that code, like reading the code is fine. And I think Swift does a good job at like hiding the parts that just make it so esoteric that you would never be able to understand code that you're unfamiliar with.
Yep.
Whereas a lot of this really helps you just kind of understand what the code is doing from a high level. But as soon as you need to like modify it, like, oh, I want to use a different generic here that just like matches to an existential protocol or whatnot. You really have to understand what's going on to be able to make that surgery happen. But most of the time you have someone on your team that wrote that code, so you can like ask them and get some help. Unless you unfortunately inherited a code base that came from who knows where, and you just need to fix it, and that's when it gets very, very complicated. So like you said, Fernando, I think it would be very nice if the pitches are less academic in nature and
Yeah.
really go ahead and like outline it from here's a simplistic, very mathematical proof kind of thing, but then here's an actual use case that you'll run into this and how to go about it. Because at the end of the day, those pitches end up being like the only documentation for these features. And the Swift guide does a good job at like introducing you to everything that's the Swift language can do, but it doesn't go over like how you can combine these things to make something more complex. And that is where the shortcomings really show. Once you have a lot of these extreme, like very fringe feature sets that, yes, you don't need to be exposed to them to know how to read the code and get through what something is doing, but you do end up being exposed to them like unintentionally, and you don't really know what to do if you don't know who to ask to kind of answer those questions.
I agree 100%. I've sort of come to terms with it. Whereas Objective-C was obviously my first language, but it was also simpler in general. Like the complex parts of Objective-C, like going down to the runtime, method swizzling, I think were immediately visible in a sense. And like when you got to a piece of code that was really complex and doing things that you shouldn't do, even though you were like aware and probably doing it right, it's immediately visible that hey, something funky is going on here. Whereas,
Don't
and
touch it.
you've heard me say this again and again, and we had a tweet chat, Dimitri, and I think you were there too, Spencer, about Swift UI, right? Where some view is like a mask, and it's like, don't worry about it, like it's just some view, and then underneath it's like this huge generic mess.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting how we've progressed towards that, whereas my personal preference would be not to hide that complexity. Um, because in the end, it all comes down to what Dimitri said, where it's like, sure, it's very easy to read some view, but when you want to try and modify something that's complex underneath, it really will blow up on your face, unless you know exactly what you need to do. Maybe it's just me again in my uh, weekly Fernando rant get off my lawn, but it keeps feeling that way the more we read about like new Swift features. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Objective-C definitely also had like 20 years up
Uh,
to the point when we all started using it to like develop a nice volume of academic knowledge around it, that you can go ahead and look up anything and everything. So yeah, Swift is maybe evolving way faster than a lot of people can keep up with, but at a certain point, it's just trying to patch in the features that it needed to have from the beginning. Like a lot of things, like the generic improvements that are happening to make it more generic. Like those features that limit SwiftUI to 10 views per like group, that will change for the better once those things do land, and they will simplify a lot of things as a result. So a lot of complicated pieces do get simplified over time as we kind of settle into this ideal language. It's just there's a lot of churn, and a lot of complication that comes with it, like needing to help everyone move to an async world, for instance. That's going to come with a lot of warnings because we've all been doing it wrong. Like there's no way around it. So we need
Yep.
we need some hand holding to get there. And we're all gonna go kicking and screaming because it's gonna be a painful process. But when Swift 8 comes around, it's gonna be a very simplified process. So we need to take those steps to better everything. Unfortunately. Any case, so what new feature are you looking forward to, Fernando?
Yeah, so that brings us to the features. I haven't read most of these, but the few that I've read are really interesting. I really liked Unavailability Condition. Type placeholders, I went through the same process as Spencer did, where it's like I don't get it, and then Paul, please don't ever leave us, Hudson, just explained the dictionary, and I was like, oh, okay, that like I get it. I wish there were a more complex project, but I get it. I get it. And then I went into Existential Any, and I think that was a really interesting and complex one. Um, it exemplifies the fact that, like you said, Dimitri, like a lot of the things that we're working on are incomplete just due to the lack of time. Right? There's a limited amount of time for everyone that can actually contribute to Swift. Uh, but I can see the language progressing, and I think in the end that's a total positive. I'd say it removes my existential questions.
That's good.
Thank you.
Yeah, so existential any is very interesting because it's one of those examples of we've all been doing it wrong, where we've maybe been overusing protocols in situations where they are not at all the right tool for the job. Because if you think about it, a protocol can be anything. It can be a struct, it can be a class, and at runtime we have no clue what it is going to end up being. So if you have an array of these things, you can't make an array of tightly packed structs. You can't necessarily make an array of tightly packed pointers either. You have no idea what those individual things are, so you need to pack in extra metadata to describe what the thing that you're adding in is, and there's no indication that this extra complexity is sneaking its way in. So that's what that any keyword actually means. It says, hey, you are adding some extra complexity here, and you need to acknowledge it just by putting this any. And in Swift 6, they say this is going to be an error if you don't have this, because you are breaking, you are essentially breaking the contract that you have with whoever's going to be using your code that you write by not specifying this. So any really makes it more concrete, just like you can't use a var if you never modify the variable. Like Xcode will go ahead and say like, hey, you never modified this, you probably don't want to be using a var. And that helps your code from like breaking in unintentional ways. But it really just indicates to everyone that's using the code, even if it's just you, that that is now a constant. It's not changing. Same with throws, same with all these keywords that might seem superfluous, but they help communicate intent, and I think that is important. So this is just one additional thing.
This is one of those places where you can see the best of Swift, where it will force you to be clear, even if the addition doesn't do anything for the language itself. I don't know if I'm making like if I'm explaining myself right. Like the try keyword.
Yeah.
Like, it'll make you see that there's something here that's worthy of attention. And it goes back to your point, Dimitri, of like, I saw a few comments that were like, but this is a breaking change. I don't want to go over all of my code and then have to add any or deal with warnings or deal with errors. So there is some kicking and screaming. But in the end, I think this is a positive change, and I think the team does too. So, yeah, I'm all for it. Oh, and one more thing. The more I read like the comments and uh, the actual introduction of the existential any, the more I realized that one of the first WWDC talks that took the community by storm was protocol-oriented programming. And it's one of those talks that I think was had an outsized measure to its importance. Like people saw, oh, a new paradigm. Oh, this is great. Let's do all in protocols. And some people really took it to heart. Like I personally was skeptical. Like I sort of like get it, but is this like truly the way forward? But there were some people who drank the Kool-Aid, right? They just went all in, and I kept seeing it on my Twitter feed for years, and I never actually get it. And now that we have the existential any, I'm like, maybe like that talk. I don't know why it was so famous, but it really had an outsized impact on the community when I don't think it should have. Just throwing it out there.
The true way forward is Enums. The true way
Yes,
forward is
yes.
Enums.
You know, Dimitri. Yes, the enums are
Enums are amazing.
Yes, I keep telling. I had a mentor meeting last week with one of my mentees, and we were going over enums in like an actual real project, and he was like flabbergasted at how cool and powerful enums can be. I just yeah. If there is one thing that I think sums up the best of Swift, it's enums, for sure, 100%.
So another thing that I'm definitely kind of looking forward to, especially as I've been writing very custom codable structs with servers that I do not control and that are not written in Swift, are the ability to now have non-string and int dictionaries be just codable. And this is made through this is made possible through a new protocol called Keyed Container, which basically allows any type to downcast itself to a string or an int for codable reasons. So basically, if you have an enum, for instance, of like 4 different possibilities, even if that enum's type is a string under the hood, that dictionary that had that enum as keys would just turn into a flat array of like key value, key value, key value, and that wouldn't be appropriate for a lot of cases when you need to encode them. So being able to use enums now as keys and dictionaries when you want to code or decode them is once again an example of the true way forward are enums, and I'm definitely looking forward to that. So we still have a few new features, but they're getting more and more esoteric. So any you want to tackle before we get to the very esoteric ones?
I was gonna joke that temporary uninitialized buffers, like, oh, that was a lifesaver because I have a lot of uninitialized buffers when I do coding.
So let's jump into that one since you brought it up.
Joke. I didn't say it in the first place. It's
So-
not a joke.
So this actually leads to something that's a bit more interesting. So if you have an array that is forcibly put on the heap, so it is out of your program's like main cached memory, and you have to perform a fetch to get it from a different part of memory. Now, on our new M1 Pros and Maxes and Ultras, that is a fast operation because they have a gigantic memory bus. But in most situations, that is a slow operation, especially if then you need to do another hop to each individual object. That just like tanks performance, and that's why C++ for the longest time was the language that was preferred amongst like game developers, where you need to have a lot of data objects, you need to do a lot of checking back and forth, and that was all made possible because you have an array full of tightly packed structs that you can then go ahead and do those operations on. So we can do that in Swift now, but there's one piece that was missing from Swift, and that was the ability to have a stack allocated buffer that can go ahead and do this as well. And that was something that you just couldn't do in Swift. Now, this makes this possible because you can now allocate a buffer that will be temporary, meaning it's not going to live longer than the current scope. So it doesn't need to go on the heap. It can stay on the stack, and it just needs to be small enough where it won't overflow your stack. So this buffer will, if you ask for one that's too large, it'll put it on the heap anyways. But in most smaller cases, it can go ahead and put it directly on the stack. You'll have what is essentially a constant size like C array for all intents and purposes that you can then just go ahead and use. And then if you call any functions, those get added and stuff like that. So this is like a good win for performance under the hood. It's something that most people will never use, but library authors will likely make use in like very specific instances to speed up things dramatically that couldn't have been written in Swift to begin with. So things like cryptography and stuff like that needed like very, very fine-grained control over things that just need to happen as fast as possible. Now we can go ahead and do those in Swift, and that's kind of exciting to me.
Nice. cryptography. I also indulge myself in cryptography on occasion.
I too cryptography. How about you?
There was one on here that I wasn't quite sure. I really only looked these up last night, so a lot of these up last night. So the I don't know if they're related, but the command plugins and then the extensible build tools were ones that I wasn't quite sure. I know it has to do with Swift Package Manager, but I wasn't quite sure what it was talking about, just as far as actually really either of those go, to be honest.
Yeah, so it's bringing Swift Package Manager more up to par to the Xcode project format. So you know how in Xcode you can make a custom build phase that will run a shell script or generate code based off of like templates that you have, much like Core Data does. Like it will go ahead and generate some code for you that you can then go ahead and use. And Xcode does that one automatically, but Swift Package Manager is like a very lightweight version of Xcode. It doesn't want to do a lot of stuff automatically without you really knowing about it. So that's what command plugins and extensible build tools really adds to it. It lets you set up in code, because remember the Swift package manifest is an actual Swift file. You can go ahead and set up any sort of chain reaction that you need to get your builds running from start to finish. And the goal of Swift Package Manager is not to include extra dependencies that Swift Package Manager can't itself take care of. So that way you don't end up in a situation where someone tries to clone your package and then it just doesn't work because you don't have X, Y, or Z installed. So this will allow those particular plugins to be defined as Swift packages that can then go and be brought in via the dependency system, so that way you can go ahead and continue the build process without being stopped along the way, if that makes any sense.
The Swift-DocC updates, I haven't read too much of them, but they've been constantly updating the docc for a while, and I really, really like that. I think having that come like to the forefront along with the other new features, I think that's really cool, because I'm a huge proponent of documentation, and so seeing it come forward is great.
Yeah, likewise. This specifically added, I think, static site possibilities, so you can just go ahead and run it as a self-contained thing. You don't need to run it in an Apache instance with lots of .ht accesses. For those who don't know, that's how you tell Apache like what is okay to access and not. And it's a hidden file that's hard to find sometimes because it's hidden. So that is a thing that came, and also going directly in with the command plugins, docc now has a plugin to generate documentation as a part of the build process. So that is a super neat like collaboration of all these tools kind of working together to make it possible to do really cool stuff. So I guess to finish off the remaining improvements, we have incremental migration to concurrency checking. So if you've been using async await and you were using Xcode 13.3, you were greeted with a barrage of warnings and failures that you may or may not have known what to do with. I think Xcode 13 and 5.6 actually bring quite a bit of new improvements to the warning system, which are like very useful. For instance, if you use self inside of a static property, self is not relating to the class or the type itself, but the method that the static property represents. And that was something that many people didn't realize until you tried to start sending actions, and those actions would never send and stuff like that. So now Xcode will warn you, hey, this self is not what you think it is. Go ahead and cast it or use something else, because self is not the tool for that. So that is one of the warnings, but with the concurrency, you can't use any main actor stuff inside of static properties. That will all fail because those are all actually concurrent. So yeah, that's an improvement. They added a bunch of sendable conformance to all of Apple's UI kit frameworks. So that way you can go ahead and not trip over using async await in those contexts. But then they also removed it from unsafe pointer types because no guarantees can be made. So it was added a little bit prematurely in those contexts. So now your code will have extra warnings if you use a lot of C stuff, and it will have less warnings if you use all the UIKit stuff, and it'll have extra warnings again if you use the async await stuff incorrectly. Though I think a lot of those warnings got turned off at the last minute. I'm not too sure. So yeah, that's an improvement there. And then the final thing was pointer arguments to C functions have some better diagnostics that you can go ahead and take if you are using them incorrectly. It will go ahead and lead you the right way. Though, again, this is like the fringe of the fringest additions that help a very specific subset, but it's a very important subset. It's the subset that allows us to use Swift without making use of any of these features, right? They are the library authors that are making everything fast for us, so that way we can use the slow, stupid way of doing stuff, and just make our app without getting held back by the creative forces that be. And yeah, that makes up all the new improvements to Swift 5.6.
Good stuff.
Feature
Some
pack.
stuff, obviously, that, like you said, I'll never touch, but also some stuff that are really cool that definitely I could have used months ago, and I think I will, be using in the coming months as well. So good stuff, and it's cool to. I think, I don't know, for me, I always kind of had my eye on Swift 5, right? That was like the goal for so long, was like get ABI stability, get all of these awesome, general language features. And I never really thought personally past, what would be past Swift 5.0. So it's really cool to now kind of see where we're going with, async away, and just really a lot of these things to kind of make the things that we've had like Codable more easy to work with. So really good stuff overall, and it's exciting to see that even now, years over half a decade later, that the community is still putting in all of these requests. And while I'm never thinking about, oh yes, this is the thing that Swift needs, it's always cool to see that there are people that are doing that and actively kind of contributing to try to make the language better and easier to use. So
Yeah, I'm left wondering like when we'll actually get Swift 6, because a lot of the additions to Swift 5.6 are just prepping developers for Swift 6, but the whole goal is to not rush it, right? So I don't think we're going to get Swift 6 for another year or two even, because once again, the goal is to not rush everyone through the process of like, here is a code base that's just not going to compile anymore. We want to give you warnings to kind of tweak things as you go, so everyone can be dragged along kicking and screaming for as long as possible. And we get to a point where the transition from Swift 5.x to Swift 6 is a very seamless one. So I think we're gonna get probably Swift 5.7 at DubDub this year, which who knows what that's gonna include. But I think it's going to be a while before we see a proper Swift 6, just because of all the changes and breaking changes that it is eventually going to introduce. Again, to better the language. So I'm hoping all the generic stuff makes it in before then. But Swift 5 has definitely been one of the longer-lived releases of Swift. I remember Swift 1, 2, and 3 came by really quickly. And then Swift 4 was like where stuff started to stabilize, and Swift 5 was, this is the modern, like, this is the language that you can really go ahead and trust and build some amazing things with. And then every point release since has just improved it. So really looking forward to what's to come. I think it's, once again, an exciting time to be a tech nerd.
Agreed.
It is.
I think we all remember the Swift 2 to 3 transition that I think broke everyone's projects. That was a rough transition for sure. So having them take their time is a good thing, I think, for sure.
I mean, as you're mentioning, Spencer, the community being a part of it is becoming more and more a thing. I think Apple gets a lot of flack for like, this is their thing, therefore they're just going to do whatever they want with it. And a lot of people have left in anger because of that. But at the same time, they are conceding more and more parts of Swift to the open source community and to work groups, so that way others can be involved in the improvement of and the stewardship of the language. So, for instance, the Swift.org website was just recently opened up to a potential work group to take care of. So that way anyone could go ahead and write blog posts. Anyone could further Swift as a group. And that's when we learned that it was actually written in Ruby. So Fernando, your time has come to change that over to Swift, because it seems like the work group's first item on their agenda is likely going to be, let's make this run in Swift, so that way
no doubt
we have something that's a full circle. So they're going to need some Ruby expertise. So Fernando, your time has come.
I'll write that down.
Okay, this week's episode of Code Completion is once again brought to you by Bon Voyage. Bon Voyage is a full-stack iOS application development course from Johnny B. With this course, you'll learn how to build a full iOS client app and associated React web administration application. The app and the site will integrate via Firebase, and as well as Stripe and Plaid for payment processing. Bon Voyage is a place to book extravagant vacations, and you'll gain the skills to build the iOS app from the ground up and integrate everything you need to provide a world-class vacation booking experience. To find out more and sign up for the course, visit bonvoyage.app/course. That's bon-voyage.app/course. And be sure to follow Bon Voyage's instructor at Johnny B Codes, that's JONNYBCODES on Twitter, to stay up to date with all his courses. Thanks again to Bon Voyage e-commerce app course for sponsoring Code Completion. And as always, I want to personally thank everyone for listening in this week. Please be sure to follow us on Twitter at Code Completion to know when new episodes get released, and feel free to tweet at us if there's ever a topic you'd like for us to dig into. Most importantly, as a small podcast, please be sure to share this with your friends and family who are also interested in any part of the process of app development. It's your support that enables us to continue doing this, and we hope to grow a healthy community around everything we discuss. Once again, I want to give my thanks to Spencer, who is at Spencer C. Curtis, that's SpencerCurtis on Twitter. Fernando, who is at From Junior to Senior, that's FromJRTOSR on Twitter, for joining me this week. My name once again is Dimitri. You can find me at Dimitri Buñuel, that's DIMITRIBOUNIOL, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, I am so happy to get rid of daylight savings. Or I guess we keep it. We keep daylight savings,
but forever.
But we get rid of the non-daylight. We get rid of the time changing.
Good.
But did you read that it already happened in 1974? And it lasted a year?
They tried.
Yeah,
No.
I saw that.
I think we can last a lot longer this time.
I hope so, but last time it happened, there were like a lot of accidents relating to children going to school at night, because they go at like 6 or 7 in the morning and it's all dark, and so there were several like road accidents like all over the place. So they ended up like canceling after 1 year. I'm hopeful, but
I feel
Yeah.
like we live in a world where there's like a country like Japan where kindergarten students like go on the train by themselves to school. Like, if that exists, we can do better. They don't have daylight savings time. Like, that's not a thing over there. And they have a much like, I guess they have the same kind of swath of longitudinal scales where like up north you just have very short days. So yeah, I'm not convinced that will like hold us back. I saw a lot of people saying like conspiratorially, oh, they're trying to like mess with the lighting infrastructure or whatever, and they're gonna get paybacks. I think all the senators just are lazy and they hate the time change every time, and they just it came in front of them and like, get rid of this right now. Yes, please. I think that was all that was necessary. I don't think they're like back of back of the door deals to kind of get this going. The simplistic nature of humans hating that we have to wake up an hour earlier or an hour later, and that messing everything up. That I think is the driving force behind it this time.
Yeah.
And I hope that children can like survive on their ways to and from school, or they just shift the times of school. Like
Right.
They do it anyway.
during winter,
It's
yeah.
early. It's like
Yeah.
I saw someone mention that like it's going to be impractical for religious reasons because I know absolutely nothing about this, but there are some people that need to pray at sunrise, and then therefore they can go to work. And they were upset by this potential change because that would mean that they couldn't go to like work at the right time. Again, like you can shift schedules around stuff ever more so in this fancy newfangled world where a lot more people are remote. And cultures change over time. Like we didn't have daylight savings forever. Like people adapted before, and people can adapt afterwards. I feel like, but that it may very much be my simplistic like worldview. I am happy about it. Sorry, people who are not happy about it. All the people who are saying, "Oh, we're going to get less hours of daylight." That's not how this works.
The movement of the Earth is going to change just because of this.
And the people who said that, like, I happen to know they are like independent. Like they can wake up at a different time. Like I don't get it.
Yeah.